there are two truths that we have. One is we don't actually fundamentally know how they work. We can't trace from point A to conclusion how this model gets the answer. The second is every now and then these models hallucinate. AI experts predict in about 2 to 3 years, we're going to have text to complicated programming. So you imagine a world where a billion people are walking around and then with a few prompts from their phone, they can write a complicated software program that then goes out into the world and does stuff for you. AI that can destroy the world. The Defense Department has weapons that can launch automatically. Over 60 countries signed on to about the responsible use of AI when it comes to controlling automated weapons.
Welcome to the Regulating AI Podcast. Join host Sanjay Puri as he explores the dynamic and developing world of artificial intelligence governance. Each episode features deep dives with global leaders at the forefront of regulating AI responsibly, tackling the challenges using AI can bring about head-on and enabling balance without hindering innovation.
Welcome to the Regulating AI Podcast, where we bring diverse global voices to discuss creating fair and equitable AI regulation. Today, we have the privilege of hosting Congressman Ted Lieu, who represents California's 36th Congressional District. As the co-chair of the House's Bipartisan Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, Congressman Lieu has been at the forefront of efforts to create fair and equitable AI regulation. We are thrilled to have him here to share his insights and perspectives on this crucial topic. Congressman Lieu, welcome to the Regulating AI Podcast.
Thank you, Sanjay. Honored to be on the podcast.
Wonderful. Congressman Lieu, just to give you some perspective, we have a global audience. We get over 1 million views. It's made up of policymakers, think tanks, CEOs of companies, AI aficionados. So they are all anxiously waiting to hear from you, and several have sent questions in anticipation, knowing the great leader you are. So, Congressman, to begin with, as the co-chair of the House's Bipartisan Task Force on Artificial Intelligence, what do you consider to be the most pressing challenges in regulating AI technology?
And let me first thank Speaker Johnson and Leader Jeffries for creating their Bipartisan House Task Force on AI. I'm honored to co-chair the task force. My counterpart is Congressman Jay Obernolte out of Southern California. And we have had a number of meetings already. There's 24 members of the task force, 12 Democrats, 12 Republicans. And we're in the process now of gathering information on AI in a number of different fields and areas. And our main mission is to come up with a report by the end of the year on what kinds of AI we might want to regulate and how we might want to go about doing so.
Well, Congressman, firstly, congratulations. And I think speaks to the leaders. And we've been lucky enough to have a lot of your colleagues on the show, including Congressman Obernolte, who was a great guest too. Congressman, you have put forward several bills in Congress. So let's talk a few of them because they are very, very important. Let's first talk about the Block Nuclear Launch by Autonomous Artificial Intelligence Act. And I'm talking about it given the current state of the world we are in. It aims to prevent AI from making decisions to launch nuclear weapons without human control. Can you explain just the motivation behind this bill and the potential risks that you're trying to mitigate?
Sure. One reason that all of a sudden there are podcasts on AI now and why everyone is looking at this issue is because of a new change in AI technology that basically hit the world less than 2 years ago. And it's these large language models. You can call them transformer models, you can call them neural networks, but essentially OpenAI disrupted the world when they released ChatGPT worldwide. With these large language models, there are two truths that we have. One is we don't actually fundamentally know how they work. We can't trace from point A to conclusion how this model gets the answer. It is basically too many calculations being done at once with too many different sort of inputs and data that we can't explain it. The second is every now and then these models hallucinate. So it will give you a perfectly English accurate answer that is totally bonkers false. So when you have these two facts, it might be okay if you're like asking questions about poetry or about writing an essay for you and there's some mistakes. We can deal with that. But there are use cases where you can't have that happen. So you can't, for example, every now and then have a model hallucinate if it's filling medical prescriptions. It's got to be 1,000% correct every time, right? That's the same in the field of nuclear weapons. You can't have it every now and then hallucinate. And so our bill is very simple. It basically says you always have to have a human in a loop. We're never, ever going to let AI launch a nuclear weapon by itself.
So that I think is a very important perspective. As I said, Congressman Lieu, given what's happening in the nuclear field, we've seen some kind of pronouncements from Russia and others. This leads me to a follow-on question, Congressman. The current buzzword in the world of AI is agents and super agents. Can you give, because it kind of relates to a little bit about this bill that you talked about, can you give our audience your thoughts on this? Because that's become like the holy grail these days.
I want people to understand how fast AI has moved just in the last 2 years. So when the first models came out, it was largely a text-to-text platform. You would ask it questions, and it would return to answers to you in text. In less than 2 years, now you can do text to video. You can also do video to text, where the AI will summarize a video of 15 minutes and tell you what's in that video. Now we have text to basic programming. So there's some applications where the AI will write basic programs for you. AI experts predict in about 2 to 3 years, we're going to have text to complicated programming. So you imagine a world where 1 billion people are walking around, and then with a few prompts from their phone, they can write a complicated software program that then goes out into the world and does stuff for you. That is something I don't even know what it's going to look like. It is both simultaneously amazing and alarming at the same time, but we're entering a brave new world. And when you have all these AI agents in the world doing stuff, things can get very messy and very complicated. It could also be quite wonderful. I don't think we're really going to know until it starts to happen. But eventually we're going to get to that step because of how quickly AI is advancing.
So AI is advancing very fast. Agents are obviously something all these organizations are working towards. Congressman, is that something that your task force is also going to look at?
Yes, we're going to look at a variety of issues, including some of the predictions of where AI goes in the next few years. So our task force isn't just charged with looking at AI, just what's it doing this year, but also what we think might happen in the upcoming few years. And then when we talk about agents, it is sort of interesting. I think it's still going to be a relatively defined use cases, because let's say you just want AI to do a very simple task, such as, for example, move a pile of bricks that I have in a corner of my house to, the fence 15 feet away. That is enormously complicated. And there's a lot that has to happen for that very simple action to occur. So I think we're sort of very far away from AI doing that, versus if you have an AI agent that can go ahead and, for example, book all your travel reservations for you in the next couple of days. So I think the use cases are still going to be very important, and where we have agents and where we don't have agents.
Well, that's very helpful. Congressman, you also co-sponsored the Federal Artificial Intelligence Risk Management Act, which would require all federal agencies and vendors to follow the NIST AI risk management framework. Talk about the benefits of adapting this framework for our audience, and how can it build trust in the government's use of AI?
NIST has done a good job putting out a risk management framework. They are continuing to work at it, and they're going to be continuing to make revisions to it, especially with the large language models that have come into society recently. This risk management framework has been adopted by a number of both private sector and public sector agencies. We're trying to get more adoption of it and get the federal government to adopt this framework. After all, it was a federal agency that came up with it. And so our hope is we can get all federal agencies to apply the NIST risk management framework, which really, I think, causes people in the agency to think about AI, to think about their risks, and then think about how to mitigate it.
You talked, Congressman, about how, private sector has also come in towards this. Can you talk about the importance of collaboration between the public and the private sectors in developing effective AI risk management practices?
Well, let me put it this way. There are going to be hundreds of millions of use cases for AI. There is no way Congress can regulate every one of those use cases. So in the first instance, we're just going to have the private sector do the right thing. They just need to do the right thing and test their products, make sure their products aren't biased, make sure they don't deploy products that could be harmful. Now, if they don't do the right thing, then Congress can still take action, even if we haven't passed a specific law on it. We could, for example, have hearings asking them why they didn't do the right thing. We could write letters. We can ask for investigations. So there are things we can do to try to incentivize the private sector to do the right thing. But the best I think that could happen for society is if all these companies really took their time to make sure that their product was safe and not harmful before they deployed it.
To have responsibility. Congressman, we've had a lot of your colleagues on our show. We've been lucky enough to do that. So wanted to just get your views. Obviously, AI, as you mentioned, is moving so very fast. The LLMs came out, then there is multimodal, as you said, video, graphics, agents, etc. How does regulation keep pace with something that you don't even know what's going to happen? I mean, and you talked a little bit about this, but just for our audience, that's a big concern for them.
So I'll tell you how I think about it. I think of two large bodies of AI. You've got a large ocean of AI and then this small pond of AI. So to me, the large ocean of AI is all the AI we in government don't care about. So if your smart refrigerator, for example, is making ice cubes incorrectly, we really don't care about that. So in the small pond of AI is the AI we might want to care about it. And to me, there's at least three buckets. The first is AI that can destroy the world. So we've talked about nuclear weapons. The Defense Department has weapons that can launch automatically. And the State Department actually has put out now a document that they've got over 60 countries signed onto about the responsible use of AI when it comes to controlling automated weapons. So we've got that category, right? AI that can destroy the world.
Right.
The second is going to be AI that's not going to destroy the world, but could kill you individually. So when your cell phone malfunctions, it's not going 45 miles per hour. But there's a lot of AI, it turns out, in moving objects, planes, trains, automobiles. And we make sure that if it's going to have these neural networks and large language models, that we've got federal regulators and state regulators who can be more attuned to unique aspects of AI and really be able to regulate them effectively and correctly. And the last bucket is the hardest, which is AI that's not necessarily going to kill you, but has some sort of harm to society. So we wouldn't, for example, want an AI software program that helps large companies hire people that is biased or discriminatory. We wouldn't want an AI program that is helping banks give out loans for that also to be biased or discriminatory. And it's harder to try to sort of address each of those use cases and figure out ways to reduce the risk. And I put also into that bucket the unfair monetization of AI. Right now, the creative economy doesn't have really a lot of rules of the road when it comes to AI. And so we have to figure out what those rules of the road should be.
Oh, that's very helpful. So for our listeners, Congressman says he's only interested in the small pond, not the big ocean. And that small pond is made up of three things: something that can destroy the world, something that can kill you, cars, planes, and something that can harm you, whether it's discrimination, hiring, etc. That's a very, very good summary. Congressman, you also have your Health AI Act, which aims to explore how Gen AI can improve patient care, which is supposed to be the holy grail. Healthcare is supposed to be the holy grail of this. Through grants, you talked about grants to universities, nonprofits, and government agencies. Can you elaborate on the potential applications and the challenges for AI in healthcare?
I'm very excited about AI helping with innovations in the healthcare field. We know that AI has now folded all 200 some million human proteins known to humankind, and given that out to medical researchers. We know that AI is going to likely make drugs
Mhm.
easier in terms of which drugs might work out in the future, which might not work out. It's going to have quicker ways to make medical care more efficient, for example, in helping doctors take notes and helping a lot of efficiencies in the medical field. At the same time, we discussed earlier, AI can hallucinate, and at a very basic level, we don't actually know how these neural networks work. We can't have AI hallucinate in use cases where you can never make a mistake. So again, right, you don't want AI to fill medical prescriptions if every now and then it hallucinates. You might think of other use cases in medical field where we can't have that happen, where the AI has to be correct 1000% of the time. Now, I want to note there's different kinds of AI, right? So when IBM pioneered, Deep Blue and they beat the number one chess expert in the world, that was a different kind of AI. That was not a neural network large language model. So there are some AI systems that are much more closed, much more constrained. And so when we talk about AI, I think we have to think about what AI we're talking about as applied in the medical field. If you have an expert medical AI system, that might be more okay in certain use cases than, for example, an unconstrained neural network where we fundamentally don't know what's going on.
We've had a lot of health experts also come in, Congressman. They talk about the potential of AI to reduce health inequity, where, equal access is not available, especially when you go to rural areas, you go to inner cities, etc. So obviously there is that big potential also of AI in healthcare. Any thoughts on that?
I do. It raises a host of very interesting issues. For example, there are some applications where you can use your cell phone and, let's say, take a picture of your skin, and there might be AI applications that can tell you if you might have something that might look like skin cancer. Not everyone in the world has access to a dermatologist. There are people who may have to drive very far to see a dermatologist. This could be quite helpful. At the same time, I've also been told these applications may in fact be worse for people who have darker skin in terms of accuracy. So what do you do with that? Do you still deploy it? Do you try and make it so that you don't have these biases? I don't know. It raises very interesting philosophical questions. Or maybe you deploy it with a disclaimer saying that it's less accurate people with darker skin. But fundamentally, the principle is there are going to be applications where people can use AI in far away remote areas as long as they have access to for example, the internet or some sort of connectivity, or they can take a trained model with them to an area that doesn't have connectivity. But it does have the capability to give people access to medical information and potentially medical care in a way that they could not have had access a few decades ago.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. You, Congressman, obviously come from a area which has a large creative economy. I mean, Hollywood, other production, you have some very large production houses, and there's obviously been some concerns when you look at Sora and other stuff. And Hollywood unions and artists have concern about AI training on artists' work and churning out some cheap imitations, as well as infringing on First Amendment rights. What are your thoughts, or what will Congress do about something like that?
So we're definitely looking at those issues in terms of the intellectual property field. There's also a number of court cases right now that are litigating different aspects of this issue. So I think Congress is going to see what happens with those court cases. And we're also working on various bills that will try to put down rules of the road. It is challenging. We're still trying to gather data. And even within this field, there's large disagreement on what's a way to monetize this. So I think it remains to be seen what's going to happen. But I think we all agree there's got to be rules of the road. And I think the extremes are not going to happen. I don't think you're going to have a case where no one gets any monetization. I don't think members of Congress want to see that happen. I think the question is, how do we monetize, and what does that look like?
No, that makes a lot of sense. Congressman, generally in trying to, advance AI legislation, and you've done a great job, but how do you balance, innovation and implement safety standards to protect individuals and society, especially in this current environment that we are in?
So in terms of innovation, I'm a big believer in
Mhm.
investments in government that can provide research funding year after year after year without having to have a profit. And government has been instrumental, for example, in helping to kick off the amazing bioscience industry we have in the United States because of all the decades of government research that went into this, or educational institutions as well. And also in terms of AI, a government had put in a significant amount of funding to work on a lot of these different issues that were precursors to what helped really these large language models to now sort of come into fruition. And so I think we need to continue to invest in government funding and research, and in research at our institutions of higher education. And I think we can get bipartisan support for that. At the same time, we have to put in guardrails. I don't think anyone likes how social media, for example, turned out. And I think there's bipartisan consensus that we don't want to repeat that again. And so again, that's one of the purposes of this task force, is to hear from all their different stakeholders and to take input, and then to sort of put out a roadmap on what areas of AI we should regulate and how we should go about doing so.
We had the director of NSF, Dr. Punch, also on our show, and he talked about how AI, especially my concern was in rural areas and community colleges, etc. So there is a big initiative, and we are really glad of doing that.
Let me just add
please.
something to
Sure.
that. So what we have now is a situation where if you want to work on these frontier models at the cutting edge of AI, you need access to these really, really large systems, right? You need the compute power. You need access to facilities that only a handful of private sector companies control. So you imagine a world where if you were a physicist working on, cutting edge physics, and every particle accelerator was owned by one of, 5 private sector companies, we might have some issues with that. And so that's what we have right now in terms of AI. And so if you're a government employee, or if you work at a university or a community college and you want to work on this, basically you have to hope that one of these private sector companies allows you to do that and gives you access, right? So we're trying to figure out, well, how do we make it so that we actually have an ability for government and academia to actually access this compute power and these kinds of facilities? One way is to actually build it. And so there actually is precedence for this. What happened, and Al Gore actually did lead the effort on this. He actually led a bill that provided a huge amount of money to set up basically supercomputing centers. And one, for example, at the University of Illinois, they got a Cray supercomputer because of that federal law. And so we might want to think about something like that, so that government doesn't have to depend on one of these 5 private or 6 or however many private sector companies to actually donate their facility or their compute power.
So that leads me to the question, is the task force, because a lot of concerns has been expressed about this consolidation of power in AI. I know the FTC has recently started looking at it, is we don't want the social media experiment where the town hall, in some ways or whatever, the social media is controlled by 4 or 5 companies. Will the task force look at how things are now getting consolidated? If you see, as you say, it's very expensive. It's like making a drug is $1 billion, making an LLM foundation model is almost like $1 billion. And there's literally on your hand, you can count on these. So is the task force going to look at that?
That's a great question. And so what I've been lobbying for is for the report we come out with to say, version 1.0, because my view is it's not as if Congress is going to do this one task force for 1 year and then say we're done with this. This is such a widespread, fast-moving, complicated area that I think it's really going to be something that Congress is going to look at for many years. And we might do, some bills here or there every year or every few months to try to, address certain aspects of AI. But certainly the issue you raise is something that I imagine we would, in fact, look at some point. I think it's a little early to tell because you do, in fact, have a lot of folks who are now interested in investing all kinds of AI. So I'm not sure we know what this world looks like in 2 or 3 years. And you also have other countries who are putting in huge amounts of money to string together, 30,000 really expensive computer chips. So we're not exactly sure exactly what this world is going to look like in a few years. But I imagine if it is, in fact, consolidated in only a very small handful of companies, then Congress might take a look at that. But I think what will more likely happen is the Department of Justice antitrust division will look at that first.
Okay. Congressman, UCLA, one of the best universities, is part of your district, along with many other great institutions. McKinsey, IMF all predict major disruption in employment in our future are going up to 60%, etc. What are your thoughts? Is that something the task force is going to look at? And I know we've had this discussion with many members, but I want to hear your thoughts on the disruption coming ahead of us.
There is absolutely going to be disruption in the labor force. My view is we just don't know where that's going to occur. And if you look at technological advances throughout human history, net, you actually end up having more jobs. But there are going to be jobs that are going to be eliminated. There'll be jobs that are going to be created. I think it's really hard to know what that's going to look like. I liken it to the 100-day weather forecast. And I'll give you an example. People have been predicting for years that, AI is going to replace radiologists. Well, guess what? It turns out there's a shortage of radiologists right now. And AI has, in fact, not replaced radiologists because it is quite complicated, actually, what they do. But what AI has done is there are now programs that make radiologists more efficient. So when a radiologist is given, let's say, 50 scans from 50 different patients, they are not going to know before they look at these scans which patients might actually need an urgent look at their scan as opposed to another patient who could, wait a while before their scan is looked at. Well, there's now applications that will prioritize and say, hey, you might want to look at these 7 scans first and then these ones a little bit later. And then let me give you the analogy of the word processor. So none of us, I think very few people actually know how to actually write a word processor and program it and create one. But it didn't really matter because the whole world one day got a word processor. Let's say it's Microsoft Word. And then we're like, oh, wow, it does spell check. It can do automatic page numbering. It can let you do fonts and all sorts of cool things. And then over time, we started to see less secretaries. But you know who it really helped? It helped folks that had weaknesses with spelling, right? It took that weakness off the table. So I think what AI is going to do is actually help a lot of non-STEM folks. It's going to help a lot of folks who don't have a lot of technical degrees or technical knowledge. And it's going to give them an amazing ability to do very technical things. And that I think is going to result in lots of innovation and lots of amazing inventions and developments. But it's very unclear right now exactly who AI is going to make more efficient and help create new jobs and in what areas AI is going to start reducing jobs.
Well, that's a very good point. Congressman, just taking you back onto health, mental health is one of our leading crises, according to the Surgeon Journal. Loneliness is another huge crisis. There have been now some AI bots that help with loneliness and others. There's Replica and others. We've got 20 million followers, etc. Your thoughts on use of AI for something that is such an important thing, and obviously from a regulatory standpoint, obviously there's all kinds of issues, but any thoughts on that?
It's hard for me to answer that because I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. I would be concerned because of the hallucination problem of large language models, and also because at a very fundamental level, we don't actually know how they work. Now, on the other hand, a lot of the medical field, actually, in a lot of fields, were based on data.
Mhm.
And there's ability to actually get data here. If you can have some of these applications, one way to do it is say, look, we're going to try to make it as safe as possible, and we're going to try to put these guardrails on it, and then we're going to collect some data.
Mhm.
And if it turns out that on average it's sort of helping people, that might be something, versus if it shows, well, it's helping people, and then for 10% of the folks it goes off the rails and helps them commit suicide, that might be another problem. And so
Yeah.
it's hard for me to know without sort of seeing any data. At the same time, there's this issue of, well, do you really want to gather data if it actually is harming people in the process? So it's a very complicated issue. I like to speak to some psychologists, psychiatrists, and those in mental health counseling field first. But it is an interesting issue you raise.
Congressman, want to talk a little bit about harmonizing AI regulations. As you know, the EU passed their AI Act. The US is working on this. China is doing their thing. India is doing their thing. Your thoughts, should there be some kind of harmonization, or we should all do our own thing, so to speak?
One of the things that lawmakers do is we plagiarize. And so what we'll do is we'll look at what other jurisdictions have done. And if it works out well, we might copy it. If it's a disaster, we're not going to copy it. If it's something in between, we're going to look at, what worked well and what did not. And so I do think it's not a bad thing that Europe went first. And so I think we're going to look at, well, how is it turning out? And I think it's something for the world to watch and to learn from.
Congressman, we are now in the thick of, we're going to be in the thick of an election season. France has just announced its election. UK, India just had their elections. There's a conversation about deepfakes and some of those things. Any thoughts, concerns? Is the task force looking at some of these things for our elections, for our democracy?
We did have a hearing on elections and deepfakes. There is a private sector initiative to basically put watermarks on videos and images and so on. There was also testimony at the hearing that also poses some technical challenges, and it could be hacked. So it's a complicated issue. I think it's hard for Congress to pass any sweeping laws on this issue before the elections, which are in 5 months.
Mhm.
I think the best thing we can do at this point is to try to inoculate the American people and say, hey, look, there are things known as deep fakes. If you see a video on the internet, don't immediately believe it's true. Take a pause and think about it and do some double checking. If you see an image that you think, is sort of out of whack or is troubling, maybe it's not true. You might just want to do some double checking. And if you see, something in your social media feed that's particularly explosive or really out of the world 2 days before the election, you might just want to pause and consider, hey, is that a deep fake? And I think the best way is to let people know there are deep fakes out there, and that, the account you're reading on Twitter or on Facebook may be powered by AI rather than a human being.
That's true. That is true. Congressman, just final quick questions, and then I know how busy you are. Quick thoughts, open source or closed source? Your views?
Open source has helped academia and helped government as well, and really helped advance the field in computing technology as well as AI. So I generally support open source. Now, if you get really advanced frontier models and you have open source models that basically can tell people, how to create the next virus that's going to start a pandemic, we'll have to think about that and think about, are there ways to mitigate that issue?
Wonderful. Congressman, thank you so much. This has been a fantastic session. There were so many other things that I wanted to ask you. I really hope that we can have you back again on behalf of our entire Regulating AI team. Really, I want to thank you for taking the time. Such a wealth of knowledge that you have, your commitment to ensuring that AI technology is developed and deployed responsibly is truly commendable. And to our listeners, we hope this conversation has shed light on the complex challenges and opportunities surrounding AI regulations. So until next time, keep exploring and keep questioning. Thank you so much, Congressman. This has been fantastic.
Thank you, Sanjay.
Really appreciate it.